right, so this slide is what is Google, and obviously you've used Google. Everyone's familiar; it's a search engine and stuff like that. But it's important to differentiate immediately the difference between Google and ChatGPT, because kind of the first impression that I've seen when people hop onto ChatGPT is they start to use it like Google. And while you can do that, that's not leveraging it to its highest potential, and kind of that's not really the point of ChatGPT necessarily, although it does have some similar functionality. So Google is basically, you give it an input, a Google search, and it gives you an output. So links, images, and data. But the limitations of Google is, one, you have to know what you're searching for. You can't ask it follow-up questions, and it cannot intelligently summarize something or expand on something. Like basically what you get out of a Google search is kind of what it is. Like you can't modify that result unless you do a new Google search. And so this is the biggest difference between Google and ChatGPT. ChatGPT is iterative, and I'll say that many times in these kind of lectures here. It's iterative. You need to manipulate it and manipulate the output to get what you want. And that's going to make a little bit more sense once we get into using ChatGPT. But this is just something to point out. It is not a search engine. It is actually something that has been trained on the entire internet. The 2021, there's a data set that's out there. It's like billions of websites and images and all these things that ChatGPT has been fed, and it ended in 2021. So it's an important thing to note. ChatGPT is not attached to the internet as of this current date. Like it's not live data, but it is basically all the data up until 2021 is kind of stored in there. So it's not going to search something that happened yesterday or last week. So it's not for current events or news or stuff like that. But it is basically a collection of all of human language, human experience, mathematics, software, all of these things into one bundle. So that is the main things to consider. So we'll get into it on the next one here, where we talk about ChatGPT and kind of the difference here, and we can talk about some basic examples. So ChatGPT, if we compare the input, you already notice that the input is different. When you look back, we had just a Google search, so we could only put in something we're searching for. ChatGPT is not exactly the same. We can do a search. You see, we still have search. We can also put in a pre-existing writing. We can also put in pre-existing code, and we can also put in what I would call a creative discovery search. So it's kind of taking the parameters or the words you use, and it can do things with that result. So it's not necessarily a search, but what it's actually doing is producing something from the words you give it. So if you give it 3 words, snowman, carrot, and rocks, and you say, do something with these 3 words, write a story with these 3 words, it'll create something brand new. So that's not the same thing as a search that's trying to return a link that's on the internet. It's actually creating something from scratch using the knowledge that it has. So if we look at a basic example, this is what a basic search would be, but there are some differences compared to a Google search. So here we're putting in a search. Give me 10 movie titles that are similar to Good Will Hunting. And so the output of that ChatGPT gave us is these movies here, Dead Poets Society, Beautiful Mind, different movies like that. And the difference is now to point out, ChatGPT has short-term memory. It can remember the conversation you had. So it's like talking to a person. So if you say, well, what is the plot of number 3? And if we look at number 3, it's Rain Man. So it's going to remember, it's remembering the context of the conversation like a human would. And it can expand on this information that it gave us. So actually what it's doing is unpacking this data for more information, which is really, really interesting if you think about it, because it's presenting us with an initial information, but we can expand that data. And you want to think of this text as data. You can expand it, or you can compress it. So you could actually summarize information. So this is kind of what it gave us in the second prompt here. What is the plot? It gave us all this information. But we could actually summarize. We could take this text and we could say, can you summarize the text you just gave me into something a little bit shorter? Or can you be a little bit more descriptive in the plot? Or can you give us a longer version of that text? So we can manipulate the output that it gives us, and we can interact with it just like as you would with a human. So this is why people say ChatGPT has some sort of level of intelligence and it's actually passed the bar exam. So it's actually fairly intelligent in the comprehension and responses it can give. And so I like to think of this as not just a search engine, but an assistant. Think of it as a person basically and interact with it in that way, and you're going to get the best results. So here we have another example of ChatGPT, but we're not using a search this time. So you remember I said we can use different types of initial data input into it. So here we have a writing that already exists. So this is from Wikipedia. And I said, rewrite this so a 5-year-old can understand it. And I pasted in this text here. So before I continue here, it's basically just this. We have our window here. Rewrite this so a 5-year-old can understand it. And I put semicolon and basically go to this Wikipedia page, copy this, and just paste it in. So it's going to understand, even though the formatting is not perfect and all that. If I just press that, it's going to basically do what we're asking. So it's intelligent. It's going to kind of understand what you're trying to explain with natural language. So what's interesting about this is we have this simplified version, and it did a pretty good job. It's nuclear fusion is a way to make energy by combining two types of atoms together. Having stars, it can make a lot of energy. So the language is not too complex. It does have the elements in here still, so hydrogen, helium, stuff like that. If we didn't want to include those things and we assume that the reader maybe doesn't understand those concepts yet, we could say, hey, can we make it a little bit simpler and can we exclude these type of words? So again, remember that we can iterate on the output. We can make it longer, shorter, more creative, more formal. Those are the kind of things you can do. And when we get into emails and marketing, stuff like that, those are pretty useful things to remember. So these are just some general broad concepts, but it's important to know that this is not just your result and you're done. So just remember that. And this is a good example, though, of compression or decompression, meaning we can simplify or expand. And that's something to keep in mind. So the next slide we have here is creative discovery. So again, this is not a search and this is not a pre-existing writing. So again, this will be kind of the third pillar here of the kind of things that we can start to play with ChatGPT. So what I wrote was, let's say you're a product designer or you're a creative art director and you want to start to come up with some naming. You're trying to create a product or branding, and we need to come up with some creative names and some good copywriting around that product to describe it. So let's say we have a lotion, and our lotion, we want to inspire it by moonlight. So what I said was make variations of these two words into a list of 10 unique product names and description for a lotion, moon and light. So actually it's not going to give us moonlight. It's not going to keep those two words. It's going to use variations of those words and get inspired by them with unique product names. So this is something that's really cool because we can actually generate ideas. So if I hit go on this and we see what it gave us, these are some really, really interesting results. We have lunar lotion, glow getter, moon mist, brighten up, luminous light, ethereal essence, moon magic, lunar glow, moonbeam light lift. So we have some really cool ones. And if you read it, a luxurious face to body lotion that provides long lasting hydration and it gives your skin a luminous, glowing finish. I mean, this is excellent. Like, you could absolutely use this for a product and the marketing for a product. And so I actually took some of this and I ran it into another AI, which creates images. So if you guys aren't familiar with Midjourney, this is Midjourney. I created these product images. I didn't Photoshop these at all. These are basically right out of Midjourney. And I used some of the text from these various results here to generate some product images. So now we have, not only we have some awesome names, we have some awesome descriptions, but we have images. So we could actually take this concept, maybe it's a storyboard, maybe it's a pitch deck to a client. There are a number of ways that we could leverage all of these things together, but you can see how they kind of work together. So ChatGPT gave us the space. This is not a Midjourney tutorial. I'll go into it at the end, just kind of showing the software basically. It's kind of like ChatGPT. You can go check it out, midjourney.com, I believe it is, to create AI generated images. But this is how we can come up with really good descriptions that we put into this that gives us better results, because it's going to think of better and more creative words than probably you can, unless you're really good at coming up with words and stuff like that. So that's kind of something to keep in mind here. So again, go into ChatGPT, try something out, try to do a creative discovery prompt, as I would call it. Give it a few words here, experiment, give it a few words, say, hey, try to come up with some unique phrasing using these words, or create a story using these characters and these words. And you'll start to realize it's not a search engine, it creates new things. So really practical for business, but also for creatives, really, really awesome stuff. So here we're going to look at a basic example of how to do some Python code generated from natural human language. So I'm not a coder by trade. I do a little bit of Python in my job. But if you are somebody who is a web designer, coder, you can basically use this as an assistant. It's not always 100% correct, but from what I've seen coders talking about on Twitter and stuff like that, I follow a lot of people. I have friends that are coders, but I do know that there's a significant increase by leveraging ChatGPT as a coder. And it pretty much, a lot of people are just having it on a second monitor at this point and pushing it that way and just always having it there. So it's extremely useful. And there are some resources at the end of this course that I've attached for coders that hopefully can help some of you guys out. And even if you're not, and you're like me, you use a little bit of scripting, maybe you have a Shopify website where you need a little bit of web coding, stuff like that. This is going to be awesome for this. So this is an example. I said, write a Python 3 script to rename all the files in the directory, 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., that could run in a Mac terminal. So I'm on Mac right now, so I need this Python code to work on Mac. And I personally, I would not know how to code this from scratch right now. I could probably Google it and try to figure it out and maybe spend an hour trying to mess around with it to get it working. My Python skills are pretty basic, but with this, I can basically create this. So write a Python 3 script and it did it. So it creates all of these things. And what I wanted to do was, oftentimes I'm dealing with images because I do a lot of media stuff. So if you're a photographer and stuff like that, maybe you have a bunch of stuff here related to a bunch of files. Maybe you have 100 pictures, but they're all these weird names here. And what we want to do is rename them, but keep the file extension. Let's say they're JPEG or whatever, and you want to keep them the same. We can do that with ChatGPT. So if you don't know how to run this code, you're like, okay, I have an idea for a script, but I don't know how to run it. You can ask ChatGPT, how do I run Python 3 script on a Mac? How can I run this through a terminal? And it's going to give you the answer. So I've done this. I know how to do it. So I can copy the directory. I can kind of paste it in here. Change the directory to where the script is saved. And I can run this Python script. So I can say Python rename files.py. And it's going to run this Python script. And if I go back to the other folder, you'll notice we have some consecutive file naming here. And you notice they started at 3, 4, 5, 6. I actually ran the script 2 times and it gave me a slightly different result. So again, this code might be slightly off or the counter's not starting at the right number. So as a coder, you might want to double check the code and look at those things, but it's still doing what we need and we have the file extension. So it is very, very useful. It can give you snippets of code. It's not going to write entire programs as far as I've seen out there, but it'll give you portions of code. And I have some other examples later that really, really are useful, especially for web design and stuff like that. So this is what it can do now. And there are many examples that I'm not even thinking of, and much more complex examples if you're at a higher end level, if you're doing kind of back end coding, stuff like that. So keep it in mind if you're not a coder. It can do software specific stuff as well. So I use a software called Nuke a lot, and it actually has read the specific API of Nuke. It has read the programming library of Nuke. So people who aren't out there that don't know what an API is, most softwares have an API that's publicly available if you want to program specifically for those softwares. So not only can it do things outside in a terminal like this, it can actually do things for the specific softwares you might be using as well. So those are things to explore and look into. So the next part we're going to move on to is ChatGPT for writing. So again, this is a creative prompt. We're not asking for something that exists, and this is not piecing together like an article that's already out there. That's not how it works. It'll actually write something new pretty much every time you give it the same prompt. So a lot of times it'll give you a different output. So it's not copy and pasting. This is not like some kind of plagiarism, although, some people, there is a big debate on, this was trained on the whole internet and there's an ethics debate. So that is something to consider. And I'm not an expert on that, how this can be used and the copyright and all of these things are still up in the air, although many companies right now are already using these tools commercially. So that's really all I can say about that. Is it's hard to know exactly which direction, but my feeling is that intellectual property is what's going to be compared against. So if it's copying too much or something, then it could have a problem. But in my experience, it is a unique result. It is new. So here's the writing. Write me 2-paragraph essay comparing the Bible and the Quran, highlighting the differences. What do we get? Pretty good. If we actually read this, I'll read it real quick. I'll just read the second paragraph. One of the main differences between the Bible and the Quran is the respective authorship and histories. The Bible is a collection of texts that were written over a period of 1,000 years by a diverse group of authors, including prophets, kings, and scholars. The texts were written in Hebrew, Aramaic, so maybe not Arabic, but not sure, and Greek, and compiled to the form we know today over the course of many centuries. In contrast, the Quran was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad over a period of 23 years, written down by his followers. So we have this really good result that is understanding what we're asking. Compare the Bible and the Quran, highlighting the main differences. It's looking at the two and finding the significant differences. Another significant difference, the focus of each text. So that's really, really crazy if you start to think about what the implications of this technology are. And that's something that's also really interesting to think about. If we think about multiple data points as if, let's say the Bible and the Quran are 2 data points, and we want to say compare those 2 things. How many comparisons can we make? Can we compare 3 or 4 data points? Can we combine 4 or 5 different concepts into one? So that's a really interesting to think about things, is it can derive relationships between either adjacent concepts or concepts that are very far apart from each other. You could say, what are the similarities between a piece of wood and a fish? And maybe that wouldn't be obvious to a human, but it could find those similarities. And so that might be a really interesting way to do sort of divergent and creative thinking, is to make those relationships between things, not only just spitting out search results. And so writing, this is a more of a historical kind of an essay type of writing, but we can do many types of writing. We'll get more into those types of business writing and contracts and multiple ways we can expand. But this is just introducing the concept, just to get our feet kind of in the water here. So we'll continue on, and hopefully you guys can experiment as well. Try writing something in ChatGPT. Try having it write something, maybe something you know about, to see if that information is accurate, or how detailed can it go. Take that writing and say, hey, can you be a little bit less descriptive or more visually descriptive? Experiment with it. And the style of writing, you could say, write in the style of this person or this person, see if it's recognizable to you. Or write in the style of a New York Post news article, and you'll see that it kind of mimics that type of language. So those are all interesting things to start to think about. So that is a quick summary of ChatGPT. We've went over a few basic examples. We're going to go into some more detailed examples now. But now, at least if you're kind of new to this, some of you guys might not be, and maybe it's some repeat information that you guys have just seen, or maybe not. It starts to get you thinking, but that's kind of the base. But we're going to go into some more advanced examples now. But here's a summary. We can make comparisons. We can simplify a summary, or expand on input data. We can discover new information previously unknown, which is interesting. I'll show some more examples about that will start to get your brain thinking about how it's a little bit different than a Google search. Because remember what I said, Google search, you have to know what you're searching for. This is a way to think of things that you don't know about. So create creative new outputs based on creative inputs, like I showed. Code from language, in any coding language, including software, Excel sheets, etc. Reorganize data, so you can actually sort data if you need to, or if you want data to work for, let's say, a JSON file or a CSV file. Some of you guys may be familiar with those file formats, which are for spreadsheets and stuff like that. So those are all things to start to wrap your head around. Could you take a giant block of text, pick out the name, pick out the location, and then assemble that into an Excel sheet? You could. You would be able to sort and find that information. So those are all things to just briefly think about, and we'll go into some more examples coming up here.